Welcome back to Positively Port St. Lucie. I'm Sarah Prohaska. Once again, I'm joined with Whitney Frazier. We're both from the Port St. Lucie Communications Department, and we're continuing our December theme this show. December is a time when lots of people are online doing shopping for the holiday season. And there's lots of things that we'd like our residents to keep in mind this time of year. And we have brought on Stanley Fidgey, our IT security manager here at the City of Port St. Lucie, to kind of share some of his knowledge, his expertise, and to give us some tips on how to do some safe holiday shopping and just in general, how to keep ourselves safe on the internet.
Yep.
Hi, Stanley. Thanks
Hi.
for coming on.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Wendy. How are you today? Thanks for having me.
All right. So, like I said, it's December. People are shopping. I know I do. I've done almost all of my shopping online this year just because it's a time saver and it's convenient.
Sure.
Can you give us, what are some of the things that we should be looking out for this time of year regarding cybersecurity?
Sure. Well, to start off with, like you mentioned, it's the holiday season and online shopping. And last year, as an example, in 2016, over 122 million Americans shopped online, whether it's via mobile devices or desktop devices. So this year, we anticipate even more. And of course, Cyber Monday and Black Friday have already passed, but it's still in the midst of the season. So with that, the caveats are that more times than not, you want to use a desktop device with a hardwire connection versus a wireless connection, if at all possible. If you are shopping wirelessly via your mobile device, you want to ensure that it's encrypted and the strongest encryption possible. Do not join public Wi-Fi networks and things of that nature because there are predators and or cyber criminals online that are monitoring your communications and try to capture your login information, your credit card information, or your social security number. In fact, the newest theme of the entire process is they'll use the information later to perform tax fraud on you later in the tax season coming up in February, March, and April. So a lot of times you think that, what are they using this information for? So that's one of the many, many, many examples that they will take and turn over the information and reuse it for another purpose against you. And they may not always use it in a way you intended, like when you monitor your credit card statement, which is another recommendation that constantly you want to get your text alerts via any changes in your credit card accounts, your banking accounts, these types of things to keep on top of what you know you're shopping for, and in turn contact the agencies that you are dealing with, your banks, your credit card institutions, to say, this transaction definitely was not mine, I did not do it. And the good thing about the credit card side of it is, of course, you have zero liability, and with banking, you have a $50 maximum liability for any fraudulent transactions. And usually banks will know to even waive that most times when they know it's not your fault as a consumer in making an online transaction. But other tidbits are to ensure that you use a different username and password for each account that you use online. Don't use the same, especially the password. And wherever websites and other online vendors allow it, try to enable what's called two-factor authentication. And that means that it is something you know, or something you have, or something you are, such as your username and password, but then you can set it up to send you a text or an email reply that has a 6-digit code that then in turn you enter. So even if the cyber criminal gets your username and password by typing it in and capturing that information, either due to you, let's say, clicking on a link to a website versus typing in, which is another recommendation in passing, that you should always type in the URL that you're going to on a web page, or copy and paste it. You never want to click on a link to go to a site, which is the easy way, and that's where they try to take advantage of you, is just clicking on things, because it will lead you to a site that looks just like the real site, and then it captures your information when you type it in, and you think you're logging into the real site to do the transaction. So that is really a good caveat, and again, try to enable that multi-factor authentication if it's available, and use strong passwords.
So how that works, so if someone had gotten your email and your username and password and they were trying to log it in, it's texting your phone, so they don't have the code. So they cannot get in at that point.
Correct. It makes it much harder, because that's where the two-factor comes in, because the time it takes for them to, even though they have technical capabilities of acquiring that information, the timeliness of pinpointing where you are as the consumer in the world is very improbable. So therefore, the time factor is the key, and that's what enhances the security. Because by the time you log in and then enter in that code, it's a one-time use code, can't be used again, and that's it, kind of a thing. So that's where the safety comes in.
So I'm kind of curious because you say to use multiple usernames and passwords, and I'm sure encourage people to change their passwords frequently. Would you say that that's the same as far as like debit cards and credit cards go? Like, because they have expiration dates on them, and usually people will hang on to them until they expire or they receive a new one in the mail. Would you recommend that people, maybe order new cards before they're actually expired, or does something like that not really make a difference?
No, and actually, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And then the other recommendation is to only use one credit card for all of your online transactions. So that way, again, getting back to what I was mentioning earlier about monitoring your credit card statement, you only have to monitor one, and everything's centralized in that statement or that card of choice. The other thing is if you use online pay, like PayPal or other types of online payments, you only want to associate one checking account that's totally separate of all your other accounts that you do your normal monthly business for home purposes. And then attach that account to the PayPal account and keep one penny in there. And when you're ready to do that online transaction, you pre-fund it, and then you purchase, and then it goes back down to that penny and you leave it. So that way, if it is compromised, that account's totally separate from all your normal transactions, like your mortgage statement or your car payment or your insurance payment, so you don't get in the rears and then deal with NSF fees and then have to go to the bank, and it takes months and months and months to rectify those situations.
That is a really good point that I had never even thought of. But yeah, a lot of people do utilize PayPal and Google Pay now and some of these other things. So yeah, that's great.
And yeah, back to the credit card, you just want to use one and then try to, and if you ever feel it's compromised, just call the credit card company and say, I'd like a new credit card with a different number if you believe that it's compromised, and they will gladly send you out a new one with a new expiration date especially. And the other part in reference to your question is never store your credit card information on the vendor's website. Like a lot of times they like you to store your credit card number, your expiration date, your name, your address, maybe your date of birth, and all that information is held. And if their databases are compromised, then your information, along with thousands and hundreds of thousands or even millions, sometimes you've heard of like the Target breaches or these types of things in the past, that's how a lot of people's information was reused, because it was just sitting there in their database and it was compromised. And once it's taken, and you have to then scramble to change everything. And so things like your social security number, of course, are not changeable. So that comes into other issues, but things that are changeable are, like you asked about, your credit card number, your expiration date, that sort of thing.
So a lot of businesses are starting to use like Android Pay and Apple Pay. Is that safer than just using credit card or debit card?
I wouldn't necessarily. I would say anything that's more convenient is usually not safer. There's always that fine balance between convenience, functionality, and safety. And the easier things become, technically, the less secure they become, unless they add additional layers of security like we talked about before. Two-factor authentication. It's an extra process, an extra step. It takes a little longer to authenticate to the site, but it makes it more secure. So the same thing with Android or Apple Pay, these types of things. The convenience tends to make things less secure because they're wireless, they're easy to use. If someone, let's say, takes your phone, as an example, then they can do transactions if you've already set up your phone to connect to Apple Pay and say then conduct transactions with the information already stored in your device. Or if your phone's compromised, which is very possible, because that's what I was mentioning in the beginning to you, try to use desktop devices more than mobile devices, because they have less security features built into them. And if you don't, let's say, operate the firmware or the operating system of the device and keep it current, as one of many examples of where they're vulnerable, then it's easily compromisable in comparison to a desktop system to do your online purchases.
Speaking of mobile, a lot of people are now buying from other people, and they're using those little pieces that connect directly to the phone where you can like swipe your card on the phone. How vulnerable are those? Do those have any type of encryption or something you can protect yourself against?
Are you talking about like the Square?
Yeah.
The Square readers? Okay.
And it's a good point, and I wanted to mention that too, and I appreciate you bringing that up, is the Square, as an example, there are versions that are encrypted and non-encrypted. So a lot of times, like if you go to a Chick-fil-A, as an example, and you go through their drive-through, the attendants out there, and they have the little device, and they swipe it right there. And you notice, usually it's not chip. So like when you go to your retailer and now you want to use your chip on your credit card, that's generally more secure than just the swipe, because the swipe can easily record that information on a magnetic stripe, whereas your chip on a credit card is encrypted. And so back to your part of the question is that it depends on the service they're using, whether it's encrypted or not. And because you're not the vendor, you don't know whether they've purchased the enhanced versions where everything's encrypted to encrypt that information in transit when the transaction's occurring from end to end. And therein lies a lot of difficulty, because if someone, again, on whether it's on a public Wi-Fi network, or if that network that, again, the information is going over wirelessly is also encrypted, so it's not only the device, then once it leaves the device and goes out on the internet through the Wi-Fi connection, is that encrypted? And so those are all the things, like, as a consumer, that it gets to a very valid point that you only want to deal with trusted vendors, large name entities that generally will have a lot better security than, unfortunately, not to go against mom and pop shops, but unfortunately they don't have the resources necessary to secure their online commerce for the benefit of the consumer in a way that a Walmart or a Target or these other larger vendors do.
Paying cash.
Yeah.
Frequent the mom and pops, but paying cash. That way you make sure you're secure and you're protecting yourself, but you're still supporting them.
Yes,
There you go.
yes. That way, you don't want to avoid your local vendors. We do want to support you, and that's why we're here today talking about this, because they can also gain from this knowledge.
Yes, they can.
And enhance their security measures so that they can then gain trusted customers, and that's what we all want for our local community.
Exactly. So, Stanley, do you have any other tips for our residents this season?
Yeah, the other thing is, we were talking about online sites before, and the other thing is, recommendation is to check out as a guest. Again, getting back to that concept where I was talking about, you log in, you enter your credit card information, your address, your name. Instead of going through that process, the vendor usually gives you an option to check out as a guest.
Yeah.
And that means it won't retain anything of that transaction. So that's also another recommendation, especially if you're leery about the site, or again, it's not a large vendor site that you're familiar with as a quote-unquote trusted vendor, then consider checking out as a guest, because then you won't leave your footprint of your information behind that someone else can pick up later and use against you.
Okay.
Again, as noted, use one credit card at a time. The other thing is, when you're in your browser on your PC or on your mobile device, you want to look for the HTTPS, and the S means secure, which means your information, again, is encrypted. The session that you are engaging to do that online purchase is encrypted end to end.
Okay.
So if the vendor does not offer that feature, which most of them are really savvy to that now and are adopting that standard, but you do still find a few now and then that don't.
Okay.
So if they do not have HTTPS, I would strongly advise not to do it, and either go into the vendor and pay cash, or use another method to do the transaction, and stay away, because without the S, it means all that information you're inputting is being transmitted in the open, include what's called clear text. And anybody can capture it and basically add it to their arsenal of information to use against you.
Okay. All right. Okay.
The other part is to keep your devices up to date. As I mentioned earlier, you always want to keep your antivirus, your operating system patches, whether it's Android, Apple, Microsoft. Whenever they prompt you to take the update, you always want to take it. Now, at times, of course, the caveat is you don't know what bugs you're going to get. Sometimes if you're an early adopter of these patches, you tend to lose functionality in your device, or something doesn't work right, and you have to deal with that nuance. But it's better to be safe and have some functional issues. And the best thing is then to report it to the vendor, and they will help over time provide a patch and get it resolved as soon as reasonably possible. But you always want to try to be proactive and apply those patches and keep your systems as safe as possible.
Okay. So I should not be holiday shop at like McDonald's or Starbucks on my phone on a open network. That would be really bad, right? Right.
You never want to go into a Panera's or a McDonald's or these other sites. That it's wonderful to create these public Wi-Fi connections, but back to what we were saying earlier, because it's public and unsecured. Sometimes if you ask the vendor, and that's another good thing, you can just go up and say, by the way, do you have a secure network that I could have a username and password to gain access to, because I'd like to do an e-commerce transaction. And if they have it, they'll provide it to you, because they're interested in fostering business. And especially, again, back to the local mom and pops, they may provide that type of service, and they would probably provide you that connection more securely, so that you would feel comfortable as a consumer doing a transaction there, or doing other personal things while you're there at their establishment.
Okay, great. All right, Stanley. Well, we are running out of time. Is there anything else you want to squeeze in really quick?
Yeah, just to mention, there's a couple of sites to go to, and one other item in parents dealing with children online and things is you can Google something called Net Nanny or other types of services out there that help children, because this time of year, as parents are buying children gifts, they buy games, and all these things are
Yes.
online,
Uh-huh.
and they have chat rooms, and they have other features that just enable all these connections into the environment that
Yeah.
they're coming from that you want to secure. And so I would suggest something like using NetNanny, and
Okay.
for the adults, I would suggest something called LifeLock to help protect your information online. So
Okay.
as we've heard from the Experian and the big
Yeah.
three having the issues, especially the one with the breach of all the people's consumer credit information, I would suggest trying to add all of your personal credit card information, your driver's license, your insurance information into an entity, even though you're centralizing it into an entity like LifeLock. It's basically an insurance policy. It helps that if your information is compromised due to an e-commerce transaction, that you'll have recourse to resolve it and backup to help you resolve it. Because it takes months and months to
Oh, yeah.
recover from something like that.
It does.
And the IRS.gov is another site that really has good information, as I mentioned, about a lot of this information being reused a few months later against tax returns in filing them fraudulently and trying to get huge refunds that
Yeah.
really
that-
shouldn't.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
All right.
that's it.
All right, Stanley, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us today. And this is really good information. I learned some things I didn't know sitting here talking to you. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks, Whitney, for coming on again, co-hosting with us today.
Hey, thanks for being here.
And we want to thank all of our guests who came on this edition of Positively Port St. Lucie. And we hope our residents have a great holiday season. And remember, put your house on the PSL and Lights map. Thank you.